Hey everyone, welcome to the DarshanTalks live stream, the DarshanTalks interview. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the products, trust the people you depend on. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about devices, or obsess over pharmacy, this is a live stream for you. This is the interview for you. I do have to emphasize, I am an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I am a pharmacist, but I'm not your pharmacist. So this is neither legal advice nor clinical advice. I do these podcasts, these interviews, because they're a lot of fun, and I find myself able to catch up with friends and learn something new every single time. But it's always good to know when someone's actually listening. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you want to ask our guest questions, please do so in the comments. I do see them, and we can ask our guest questions. And after the talk or during the talk, please feel free to share the video. I do have to emphasize that these are considerations. They don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the guest or their employers or their clients. If you want to reach out to me, you can always do that on Twitter at DarshanTalks, or just go to our website at DarshanTalks.com. Today's live stream, today's interview is actually really fun because I get to talk to a guest I've had several times. I've worked with him before. He is amazing. He's globally renowned. So if you are someone who's trying to understand how blockchain works, if you're trying to understand how DLT works, you should probably care about today's discussion, because it's going to have an impact not just in your industry, whatever industry that is. That's the funny part. But just impact the world in general. We were having a discussion about what this technology is, and I know, for example, there are podcasts that are focused on blockchain. They do a great job talking about it. But for those people who are still, and Ray does a great job talking about it, and that's Blockchain Unchained. But for those people who don't know what it is, you should absolutely come on, listen, and ask questions. Our guest today is the CEO of Acor. He's focused on rights hash. He's got out a new product known as Clinical Trials Explorer, which I want to talk a little bit about now. We'll flash that link to it as well. But we have a lot of things to discuss. We can talk a little bit about patient centricity. We can talk a little bit about patient access to information, what it all means. So our guest for today is Jim Nasr. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Hey, Darshan. Doing well. Yeah, great to connect, as always. You're doing something good.
We already have people who are excited to have you on. So Soham's already excited. So that's always good news. So Jim, let's talk a little bit about this, right? Let's talk about, again, for those people who have heard the term, a quick definition of what blockchain is. How is that different from DLT? And then we'll get into a little bit more general, more specific questions.
Oh no, you're not going to start down this slippery path again.
I always do.
I'm going to be, because I've talked about this before, and we can be into nuance and talk about all kinds of things that will become very, very detailed. So in a very, very high level kind of description, blockchain is a subset of distributed ledger technology, right? Blockchain is a form of it. Distributed ledger technology, for like a high level simple description really is decentralized computing that you can use as an infrastructure to basically show trust, show computational trust, not necessarily human trust. Yeah, I mean, you could certainly have humans and entities get trust from it, but it's really about using cryptography and distributed computing to show trust in like flow of information. I'm going to stop there because, and again, as you mentioned earlier, there are many people, who've talked about this, in a lot of, just great length and great depth. So I encourage your folks to listen to it.
Absolutely. And we will actually talk. Ray Dogan does a great podcast called, I think it's Healthcare Unchained, and you can listen to that, and that's always great. But the what I wanted to get into then is first of all, the origins. You talked about it being a decentralized computing, which to me is funny because I remember I grew up at the time of like Kazaa and Napster, which were the exact opposite of trust, because half those links were fake. The other half had viruses on them. And then you'd get the 3 links that actually worked, but you were downloading something that was illegal at that time. But we've now moved so far from illegal products to now becoming legitimized. Could you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
the word trust as it's used in the context of DLTs and how that's going to play into something like patients trusting products that are coming out, whether it's in the context of Clinical Trials Explorer or whether it's in the context of many of the other things you're working through?
Yeah. But I mean, you raised a very good, kind of, I guess, a little bit of history around decentralized computing because that was 20 years ago. And of course, a lot of us were experimenting and, oh, wow, look at this. I got, my favorite song for free. But it seemed kind of shady, right? It seemed like, wow, this is, and like you say, a lot of viruses and things. So, but that really was this idea of kind of peer-to-peer computing. That was like, I'm sending it to you from my computer to the world, things like this. So I think with blockchain and DLT where it is now, really it's this idea that there is a degree of computational trust. There is, but I mean, there's I think it's a misnomer. People think that if you're using blockchain, by definition, you're anonymous, and that really isn't true. Right? I mean, it could be this zero knowledge scenario happening, but in many cases, the decentralized computing, is not a predicator of you not having know your customer type of provisions, right? And many times, in fact, all the work that we do, as example, with our blockchain technology, we always have the cryptographic signature that proves computationally who we are, and that there's a whole trail of information, such as when a transaction happened, how much network fee there was, etc. All these things are there because ultimately, what nobody is saying is let's use blockchain to essentially create, like an obfuscation of facts. You can certainly be privacy preserving, and you need to be when it comes to, for instance, having information that is around patient healthcare, but that's different than having kind of essentially illegal transactions or things like this. So back to your point about kind of healthcare and things like this, or patient orientation and patient data and things like this, and where blockchain could fit in. Really the net of it, I think, is what is it that we think currently doesn't work, right? What doesn't work is to have one entity, a very large one, albeit, and typically tends to be that, essentially be the kind of the governor of all your information, and you're beholden to them, and then when things go wrong, or when you want to change course from what they want to prescribe, it's really problematic. So Facebook is a very good example of this, right? It's this idea that all your data is, essentially really owned by them, and if they change their policies and terms, well, that's kind of what you've signed up for. You are very much a product, right? So that's that. In the context of healthcare, I think what it means though is that many times, we as humans, we move, right? And our diseases, again, COVID is a very good example. They don't respect boundaries, right? They don't respect time zones and geopolitical boundaries. We move around. So our medical record really needs to be portable, and it's very much our data. So for it to basically sit within, the bastion of one entity is really not good. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's our data. And then you look beyond that, if you want to make that data usable, like if I want to get on my phone, because I'm traveling, or because I want to go out and watch, the Brooklyn Nets play, in their stadium, and I need the proof of my COVID vaccination, and or proof of the, having taken the PCR test. All that stuff really belongs to me, and kind of, how do I get it? How do I make it easy to get to? How do I make sure it's trustworthy? All these things are kind of questions, and I think the net of it really is there's a number of things happening at the same time. One has been around this idea of data interoperability, and we have talked about this in healthcare, and the big kind of standard there is what's called FHIR, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, right? Essentially, it's just a variation of the underlying RESTful API protocols that the internet itself uses, right? So it's like a little variation to how the internet communicates. So you have that. That's good. That's definitely a good step forward. But then the next question is, and you and I know this, having been in healthcare a lot, is the data is all over the place, and it's sitting in all kinds of exotic, old, archaic, new systems all over the place. And now there's even more relevant data, like for instance, all your wearable data on your Apple Watch or Fitbit or whatever, or other kinds of wearables and your genomic data. All of these things really belong to you and complete the picture. So the question is, all right, now you can get it through some kind of interoperability or like readable standards. But then how do you make sure it's trustworthy? How do you really know that that was actually your latest? Like for instance, if you're retrieving your clinical data from whatever your portal of choices, was it the latest? Did you retrieve the correct observations that then maybe your next doctor would need to look at because you're traveling and that could be a relevant situation? And then, can you make sure that all this data is essentially kind of, basically really associated to you, its sources are trustworthy and they're not manipulated along the way, all these things. So when you look at it in that kind of a context, and your options are one, I'm going to trust one giant entity. Let's call it, Amazon or whoever. Like you guys are like a $500 billion, dollar business. So we're going to trust you because you're not going to go away. That's one option. That's been the option, but that's not really a good option. It's great for them. It's great for the Epics and the Cerners. They make a lot of money. It's brilliant. I mean, what a business model. Like, make it, make it non-interoperable and essentially own all the data. It's great for them, but not very good for everybody else. So the other alternative is, okay, we're going to have all these like little pockets of data. And then the issue is, well, how do we make sure that this data is actually coming at the right time, is secure, it hasn't been altered, and that's where blockchain kind of comes in, right? That's where decentralized computing comes in. Again, I exaggerated a little bit, but to be honest, not that much, right? So I think that where we're at, and it's not just for health data, but in general, for a lot of consumer-oriented data is people are understanding they own the data. People understand that there's value in the data. People understand that they could potentially even, get paid or have some kind of a remuneration, right, from the data, and the data is valuable. And then there's this idea that, look, we all have smartphones and we want to get to this data easily. How do we make it work? How do you make it all these things work? Where the user, the owner of the data has a say, at least can monitor it. And then you kind of give a chance or provide an opportunity for the user to be able to see the flow of the information, in whatever app they want. So when you look at it, and I added a lot of points together, but when you look at it in this kind of a context, you need some kind of an infrastructure for trust, for trust of data moving, right? That's the net of it. That's in a long-winded way. That's the net of why blockchain, where it could be used, but it's very much infrastructure. What it doesn't do, Darshan, and you know this very well, it doesn't, like, just because you have blockchain and you could say, well, the data flow is, secure or is privacy preserving. That doesn't mean the data is useful. That doesn't mean that the patient, is going to be able to get the information they need. That's a whole different thing, right? That's not infrastructure. That's building useful applications and building things that actually make people's lives easier and simpler, right? So I don't want to conflate the ideas that just because you're doing blockchain, it means you're building good applications.
I 100% agree with you. And I have several questions. I actually was writing down the questions because there's so many to count.
That's a problem with giving an open context thing, like, hey, here's 1,000 feet of range you can cover. It's like, okay.
I know that's the best part of talking with you. You know so much. It's always fun to sort of then pick and choose what we get into. But you mentioned this very important concept that with people think that blockchain is anonymous, and that's incorrect. And then you talk about the difference between
largely incorrect. There's some instances where it could be anonymous, but in the use cases that we're talking about, right? The work that we do, that's certainly not the case. There's definitely know your customer element to it.
So that's exactly my question, which is, could you talk a little bit about the difference between privacy and anonymity in the context of blockchain, and how you can be both one or neither depending on context?
Yeah, it's a very kind of it's a nuanced scenario. It's one that I think you gotta really mulch through, because I'm not a fan of like one answer fits all, right? It doesn't, right? So this is what we do. This is what we do, for instance, with rice hash, right? You may remember from prior conversations that we basically use non-fungible tokens, not the expensive ones that you find on Ethereum, where like a little 5-second video costs $10,000. Not that, because that's not practical. We do it with different technology, but regardless, we use a token that is essentially unique, right? That's what non-fungible really means. It's indivisible, it's unique. And we associate it to any number, like one or more digital objects. Now, it could be consent, it could be a document, it could be a vaccine, QR code, whatever. That doesn't really matter. But the thing that does matter, though, is this. The way we do it, and I'm not prescribing this is the way to do it, it's just how we do it, and we think it makes sense for our context. What we do is that we put some trail of information, not trailer information, on the public ledger that basically says, look, this transaction was done at this time. It costs like X fee. The payer, like it could be Acor or our clients or whoever, this is their ID. This is the payer ID. This is the transaction function. Like, for instance, if we were doing like create document, we show that it was a create document. So those things are public. You can go and interrogate it. It also shows our cryptographic signature. It shows that, like, Jim Nasr signed this, and that's a unique signature tied to that particular person or organization.
Jim, we have your product up here. Could you talk about how I'd even see that?
Yeah, if you go and click on the demo, you'll see this. It's in the video, and there's an audio and stuff, but this will be there. Again, I don't want to distract from this, but the video will definitely show it, and we can obviously do other demos. And we have on our YouTube channel, we have much lengthier demos as well that kind of walk through all this stuff. But what I'm going to do is this. The information that I put in here, that information is that I just described, that metadata, if you like. And unfortunately, Facebook has ruined the word meta as well now. But regardless, I mean, seriously, it's like let's pick the least intelligent word to describe a company. So anyway, where I'm going with this is that information essentially is out there in public. It's on the ledger, right? What we also have some other information that essentially is encrypted. It's what we call hashed, such as the content of the document or the QR code that refers to your vaccine status. That is also there, but that is encrypted. There's a very strong encryption is used to put that, if you like, that encrypted reference on the ledger. Now, what is that useful for? That's privacy preserving. That takes your, let's say, as example, your health record addendum or update, and puts a reference, an encrypted reference, on the public ledger. You can't look at that encrypted reference and re-engineer it, unless you have quantum computing or, we're some way ahead of where we're at right now from technology. You never know, but let's put it this way: it's extremely unlikely, right? And it would take an enormous amount of resources. So there's this encrypted reference. So what is it useful for if you can't really do anything with it? What's useful is that if somebody says, prove to me that really it was, James QR code at this time, you could take that encrypted public reference, which is an immutable reference on a ledger that's not controlled by Jim or Darshan or Amazon or Facebook or none of that, right? It's on multiple computers. You could use that and then reference back an internal secure database and say, oh, look, it turns out that really was, that transaction that's publicly out there really did refer back to this actual health record that is private, secure, and a secure system that's not on a public ledger. That's the idea. So what that amounts to then, is essentially is a privacy preserving way to show a trail of information, right? So that's how we do it. Again, it's not to say that's the only way of doing it, but we think that's a way in which you could have some data that's useful publicly and shows the trail of information, shows chain of custody of information, or essentially shows the connecting of the information. But then the actual information, the actual consent, or the actual QR code or whatever, that is not public at all. That's private, and you can only get it with the right kind of permissions, with the right kind of authority and jurisdiction. So that's not going to be just like you would. If you're going to go and subpoena somebody's records, you got to have some kind of a court-ordered document that allows you to do so. It's the same kind of thing. You can't just go and look at a ledger and say, oh, wow, Jim had a COVID vaccination at this time or whatever. That's not that wouldn't make sense. So this is really the idea of privacy preservation, something that looks anonymous, like if you look from the outside, that information that's encrypted looks anonymous, but in reality, it's really pseudonymized, which means that on the one side, on the public side, you see it as an encrypted, like some kind of anonymous gibberish, but there's a reference to the actual information that's stored somewhere off the chain and in a secure environment. That's HIPAA compliant.
So here, that's a really important question you just raised, which was what I'm hearing you say is that on the chain, you may one of the ways to do this is on the chain you put on information that that is publicly accessible, so you can track the information to a certain point, and then there's, for lack of a better term, an air gap between the actual data and the information on the blockchain. And the only way to get to that is someone who actually has the appropriate controls, the appropriate keys to get past it.
Precisely.
So,
in fact, the keys thing is very important. You mentioned that, because the way we would practically implement that, like how you would see it, is would have one or more keys that, as an example, like, you have to have, like, say you lose your house keys, right? And you basically say, to your neighbor, look, if these, like, 3 out of these 5 other people, come and attest that I really am Darshan, because, whatever, maybe you've lost a lot of weight, or in my case, you have dementia, then it's okay for you to give me the key to open my door. It's more or less as that kind of an idea. So but of course, we're talking about cryptographic keys and private keys and things like that.
Right. But my question for you is, that means that whoever's on the other side of that air gap, they need to have some serious protections for your data. And I don't mean just purely from a computer-based perspective, so not just technological protections, but also social engineering protections.
Yeah, but that is very much, fully agree, but that's very much the world we've been in.
Agreed, without a doubt.
Yeah.
My question for you is, do you think we have those controls in place, or do you think we need better laws that actually create better controls? Because in many ways, coming from a lawyer's perspective, I think that there is a little bit of a Wild Wild West feel to IT right now, because we keep developing so quickly that that we sort of assume and hope that people are following the rules.
Yeah.
And in the case of Acor, obviously you guys have put in a bunch of controls, but for every Acor there are several who aren't. So how do you balance that out?
So like, I think it's reality that technology is going to be a decade or more ahead of law, right? And regulators. Even in cases, I mean, we're seeing it right now, in the crypto space, right? Where I mean, you're seeing things that you're like, whoa, really? Somebody paid, I don't know, $500,000 for like a GIF on some random network. So I'm not a big fan of over lawyering. I think that can really stifle innovation, and I'm not a big fan at all of these people kind of make claims that, hey, I own some idea. I own the idea of tokenization for anything known to man, because I think that essentially, what was empirically proven is that we're moving at the speed of like open collaboration or open source of innovation, right? That's what's proven. So I think, going retrospect and trying to like lawyer up or patent up and things like this is foolish. But people do it. And again, you and I, we spent a couple of years, and well, in my case, a couple of painful years, and you a lot more, in the life sciences space, and the mentality. Everything is going to be a patent, because that's how we work. Regardless of the fact that by the time you come up with a technology patent, it's already kind of just obsolete. But regardless, that's the mentality. Is let's lawyer up, let's patent up, right? So I don't believe in that at all. I think what we've got to do though is this. I think we largely need to regenerate regulators, because I think many of the folks, again, FDA is a very good example, and I was at the CDC and other places. Many of the folks who are now tasked to understand what's going on at the technology space, that really is largely impacting everything. Technology is not some kind of, technology is an undercurrent, right? For everything. You mentioned this at the beginning. It's not some kind of a, like here's an industry that's just like very kind of, very insular. Not at all. It's very much an undercurrent. So you need, if you have the same regulators who were in their jobs in the 70s, which unfortunately is the case in many cases, particularly in life science, and you know this, right? You know this as well as I do. That's a real problem. That really is, because what was going on in the 70s is not what's going on in 2021. So we need to regenerate the regulators. We need to bring in some younger, more technically aware, just a little bit more forward thinking, a little bit more imaginative, regulators, and allow them to bridge this gap between, what is an archaic, kind of set of laws and things versus where technology is, because you can't have technology be at a pace that's completely like outside the norm of any kind of provisioning or any kind of like control. That's not a good option. But you also can't have rules and regulations from 30 years ago, right? I mean, look, good example is like people talk about this. I know you and I have spoken about this at some point. Hey, we need to show that the system, right? It's this FDA system is a controlled system, right? And here's 21 CFR Part 11. Let's be compliant to 21 CFR Part 11. Well, much of that was written before you had mobile technology. I mean, so you're telling me I'm building an app that's going to be on a phone for which there is no provisions on the rules and regulations. That doesn't really make sense, right? So that, to me, if you're thinking practically, I think that's what needs to happen. Now, the good news is, you look at, say, the Wyoming, right? They just passed a state law, and I think state law bill like number 37 this July, where they're very forward thinking. They're allowing things like decentralized autonomous organizations, blockchain-based technologies, blockchain-based organizations as part of a company, and very much forward-looking. So I don't think this is like some kind of nobody in the U.S. can ever do it. I think we just have to, we have to pick the one or two that really are pushing this, the regulators, and find out how they're succeeding, and then encourage them and maybe give them some resources. Because I think in general, I don't think it's going to make any kind of. I don't think we're going to slow technology, right? What we want to do, though, is we want to avoid more bad blood. We want to avoid more of the Theranos, because those things are also happening.
It's funny, the conversation we just had reminded me of the many times you and I have sat in the office before, and I'm going, we need to put this down, and you're going, I'm moving too fast for you. And I'm going, no. I hear exactly what you're saying, but it was memories, which was great. It was fun watching you work and go through the thought process there for a second.
I mean, here's the thing. To be honest with you, I'm a little bit jaded by this whole thing because what I don't like, is and we see it like almost every day that you can cite an example literally every day. Just go to Google or whatever, like these, gray-head old CEOs been in the same job, essentially have done the same thing for many, many years, are saying all these things. Patient care, patient centricity, secure this, that, the other, but the actions haven't changed one bit, and frankly, their incentives haven't changed one bit. And I think, to me, that's the thing that makes me jaded, right? Because I think these people need to get out of the way. They're not the answer. They haven't been the answer. They think these things are basically an exercise in public relations and communication, but that's not the case at all. I think you have to actually stick your foot into it and make an investment. You have to, it's more than just sitting behind an Excel spreadsheet and running an organization from an Excel spreadsheet. So
I'm going to challenge you, which I haven't done in a long time, so it's always fun to pull that up. I technically am past my time limit, but I'm going to ask it anyways. My challenge for you is, I 100%, what I hear you saying is, industry, and I don't mean necessarily pharma, but any industry needs to support innovation, and I'm 100% behind you.
Yeah.
What I've always found is that the conversation where you and I sort of miss is this idea of how much risk should a company take on for that to be worth it, and the conversation both you and I don't get into, and we've had colleagues who will, is when they talk about how does all of that play out financially? So let's talk about the component you and I sort of have conversations about, which is, how do you in your head judge whether the risk of something is worth the investment?
Yeah, look, again, we are not necessarily aligned on this. I have a different opinion, but that's okay. Because
that's okay.
In my opinion, and I think there's a lot of empirical evidence on this, innovation actually happens in very, very small pockets, like literally groups of 4 or 5 people who are very pissed off. They're at their edge,
right?
But they're given within a large organization. They're given the political muscle and some limited, not like billions of dollars, resources to innovate, and frankly, you get people out of their way. If you look at that, you see the innovation happening. But that doesn't mean that, and I think that's a low risk financial investment. I think that's a low risk organizational investment. It doesn't really change your kind of core business or anything like this. I think what that requires, though, is it requires people at the highest levels, to basically think in this way and to get out of their own like mindsets.
Yeah.
And because sometimes you talk to these C-level people and they think innovation only happens at Google. It really isn't the case. Yeah, I think even
Google, not even close. Yeah.
I know folks at Google and at very large high tech, and they're very concerned that as they start as innovation companies, of course, as it become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, their rate of innovation has really declined unless they can very systematically and really engineer these little pockets of innovation, right? But that really is going back to the basic principles of let's find 4 or 5 of the best people who are really pissed off, give them a big problem, or find out what is a big problem that's really kind of grinding their gears, and say, go and do this, I'm going to get out of your way. Honestly, when I was at the CDC, that was the case with us. They allowed us to do so, and I give incredible credit to my boss and the government for doing so, because they had also spent years with the old model, like millions of dollars spent with lots of consulting firms that got them nothing, right? No real results. So, but I think fundamentally there's a culture thing that they have, and I'm a big fan of this idea of culture, because it's not something you can just like preordain.
Right.
You kind of have to have at least somebody at the very top with a little bit of personality, a little bit of again, you can Novartis as an example. I think they're a good example in the pharma space of if your top guy actually really believes in this, puts an investment, you see the results that you get versus the many others that you don't. So it's just an example that comes to my mind. I'm not to say they're the only ones, but I think you kind of have somebody at the highest level, board, CEO, whatever, who really fundamentally gets this or is energized by this. Because if they're not, then really, as much as you want to be grassroots, you just can't surface it to a high enough level for it to really have an impact organizationally. But then once you have that, then basically groom this culture of people, who like to noodle, tweak, and innovate, because it's doable. It's doable across every organization.
I think Novartis is such a great example, but I won't get into picking on them specifically. But I'll talk about pharma in general, and this is where I think we have an interesting sort of mix, and this is why I enjoy talking with you. As you pointed out, industry is probably about 10 years behind. Technology is about 10 years ahead of where laws are and industry is in many cases. And I was kind of mulling that thought over, and what struck me is that in general, in compliance, one of the things we have to look at is the fact that the cases that come against a company can often be 10 years old. So you're not just looking at the risk that exists right now. It's the risk that could exist when someone changes their mind and laws catch up eventually.
Sure.
So my question that I have to consider when I advise my clients is that, yes, this could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but what would it look like 10 years from now? We can only interpret things based on what we know today. Yeah. And that lack of knowledge makes lawyers more conservative and frustrates technologists like yourselves.
Yeah. But here's the thing, though. Again, and this is where I think, like you and I, we're good friends and work together, and we continue to do so. I mean, this is really, to me, it's kind of a little bit of a tete-a-tete, just right. But you're a lawyer, right? That's your background. Your thinking is,
different.
you're on the one side, you're like 5 degrees, from base. I'm 175 degrees from base, but we try and get together, right? And I think this is part of the collaboration. It's part of the idea because if you left everything to the device, everything to the technologist devices or the lawyer's devices, I think you're going to find very, things that are going to be suboptimal and just not going to work, or are going to be incredibly like risky and things like this, or So I think we need to collaborate. You got to bring different functions together.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, I think there's definitely good points to be made.
And I'll take you one step further. I think right now, industry in general focuses on the lawyers because it's easier. It's easier to say I didn't do something because my lawyers told me not to. Right. And I think that's problematic from an innovation standpoint because you can't. Lawyers will always tell you slow down just so we can catch up.
Sure.
And that's not useful if you're trying to speed up and sort of innovate. To the point you were making, I think Google. I'm a shareholder in Google, and I can tell you that the innovation you see from, I'm making this up, but Snap or Twilio or any of those guys is substantially more only because they aren't, and maybe those are bad examples because they are actually more developed. Right? Yeah. But I'm thinking substantially smaller organizations, the lawyers aren't slowing them down as much. Now they get into more trouble because of it, but the ones that survive that are the ones who've gotten further. So that I think is the balance you have to really strive for. We can keep talking. Go ahead.
But, I think this is one of those things. That struggle is not going to go away. I think this kind of goes back to my point, though, where I kind of feel like, again, I made a comment about regulators, refreshing, regenerating regulators. I think with attorneys and lawyers, there's obviously a need for that. I'm ever more so now than ever than before, because you have such a, it's a global world. You have cyberspace and real space and crypto and I mean, there's so much going on. But I think this is also where you have to say, all right, in this world, how do we make sure our attorneys are relevant? They're educated correctly. They're where they need to be individually and collectively, because the world is changing. We just can't. You just cannot put the genie back in the bottle. I think everybody would agree to that. Right. And I think that, to me, that's the kind of where I hear people, and they're still a little bit delusional about, well, I didn't hear about it, therefore it didn't happen. That to me, I have a problem with. You and I know people like that, right?
Absolutely. We can keep going. We're well past time. So let me ask you a few questions, as you know. The first one, obviously, is just how can people reach you? And that's your Twitter @JNasr. Or they can find you on your website at acore.com, which I've flashed on the thing a few different times. Here's the next few questions. This is a new one, which I haven't asked you before, which is, what is something most people don't know about you?
Most people probably don't know that I'm actually, very much still involved in soccer. I coach soccer, at the state level here in Georgia.
Really?
I'm an ODP, what's called Olympic Development Program, ODP head coach, and I'm still, it's my passion. It's my number one passion. I think, I try and keep my, my soccer and personal life outside of my Twitterverse or whatever. By the way, I made this joke on Twitter a little bit earlier. This whole thing of like now everybody's adding verse to everything.
It's just so meta.
So it is very meta. Thank you. So I'm just poking a little bit fun at myself. But yeah, soccer remains my number one passion. So it's
a really cool one.
In my blood, one way or the other.
What's something you learned in the last month?
What did I learn last month? I'm going to go outside of my professional stuff. I've been doing a lot of cycling. So I've been learning a lot about. Like I've been Zwifting. I got into Zwift for the first time, and
I'm sorry, Zwifting?
Zwift is an app. You look it up, ZWIFT.
Okay.
So a lot more actually. I've been become a lot more serious, I guess, cyclist for the last year or so since COVID, and I'm learning new things about cycling all the time. So
I'm learning new words like Zwifting, but okay. What is something that made you happy in the last week?
Happy in the last week. Well, notwithstanding last night, it's been the Braves, right? The Braves have been doing really well. So hopefully they'll win on Tuesday and get the World Series.
I will pretend to know what any of that means because I am not a sports person, as you know. And my last question for you: what would you like to ask the audience?
Ask the audience. I think it's poignant to ask people about, how they see, their specific view of healthcare improving. Because we often we project, right? We project, hey, making it more secure, making it faster, making it on your phone will make it better, in some ways. But obviously we have some specific data points off of it, but it's always interesting to get individuals' perspective, because I bet you, like, for instance, I was talking to somebody and they were talking about simplifying the process for instance, for doing like a joint replacement procedure, which I'd never really thought about, but all to say it involves a number of different specialists and a doctor and a hospital and all this, and that process is convoluted and it's stressful. I'd seen it from a pricing perspective, which I think is, probably number one in my mind. It's the number one issue in healthcare in general. It's the number one systematic issue. That price opacity to me is huge. But I'd like to hear your audience's opinion by these things.
Very, very cool. I don't have anything more to add. Jim, it was wonderful having you on again. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be chatting soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Darshan.